Good evening, ladies. Lovely to see you. We're here today as part of Metastatic May, MetUpUK's campaign, which is to raise awareness of secondary breast cancer. And around a third of patients who are diagnosed with primary breast cancer will go on to develop secondary breast cancer. And this is where the breast cancer has spread outside the breast to other organs of the body. And it's sadly currently incurable. And for primary breast cancer patients, kind of secondary breast cancer can be quite scary. It's not necessarily something you really want to think about. But at MetUpUK, we think it's really important that primary breast cancer patients are aware of the symptoms of secondary breast cancer and also engage with the issues that face patients living with secondary breast cancer. So because of this, we thought we'd have a discussion with some primary and some secondary patients today. And so why don't we start all by introducing ourselves?
Hi, I'm Laura Ashurst. I live in Stokesley, just on the edge of North Yorkshire. I was diagnosed with secondary breast cancer in December 2007. I'd had 2 episodes of primary breast cancer prior to that. And yes, it was identified that it had spread to my lungs and pleural lining. I've been extremely fortunate in that it's been currently controlled with letrozole, and I have Zanita infusions.
Hi, I'm Emily Lunn. I'm 39 years old. I was diagnosed in 2017 with HER2 primary breast cancer, and I don't have a secondary diagnosis.
Hi, I'm Mary. I'm 56 years old. I live in Enfield, North London, and I was diagnosed with primary breast cancer in August 2007 and with secondary breast cancer in July 2014.
And I'm Helen Matthews, and I live in Sheffield. I'm also 39 years old, and I was diagnosed with primary breast cancer in 2017.
I think, Mary, did you have a question?
Yeah, I've got a really, really good question, which I think a lot of people would love to know, you know, what you primary ladies think. From your perspective, what is it that stops a primary breast cancer patient or person, because we don't want to use the word patient too much, wanting to know about secondary breast cancer and, you know, all the implications of that?
I'll answer this one if that's okay, Helen. So I think the biggest issue for people that have a primary diagnosis is the fear of recurrence. So when they finish treatment and they're moving on from that disease, they spend their time fearing it coming back, and you know, that worst case scenario of it spreading somewhere else. So I think that we kind of avoid talking about it. It's kind of like, you know, don't worry about something unless you have to worry about it. So I think, you know, for me, for quite a while, it's like I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to acknowledge it. But I found that this kind of didn't help me. And I think not knowing what those signs and symptoms were that I needed to look out for actually made me more anxious. So that's when I got involved with MetUpUK, because then I could, I first came across kind of the information online, and then I use that information to know that if I have something and I'm concerned, that I can look at the information and see if that would, if you know, if it's something I need to have a concern about, or if it's something that I can kind of, you know, think, is this normal? Is this something that could be from any other reason? So yeah, I think that's why people don't want to do it. I think that it is that fear of recurrence, and kind of a little bit like, oh, I'm going to bury my head in the sand. So you know, I'm not facing that. But I did find that by being more informed actually gave me a sense of control, and feeling like, you know, if something would happen, I would be aware of it.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's really easy to just tempting just to stick your head in the sand and kind of think, oh, I've finished my treatment, I'm not going to think about this anymore. But it's actually not healthy. It's not a very good way to be, really, because you still have that, don't you? I mean, you still it's still a possibility. So
yeah. No, definitely. I think our oncologists have got a lot to sort of answer for, in a way, because a lot of them just make you think that actually, you know, there is no chance that you're going to ever have a reoccurrence. So it's like you almost go off thinking, well, that's it, you know, I'm actually technically cured. But, you know, in reality, we know that that isn't the case for everybody. So, you know, there are people that are fortunate enough to go on and not have a reoccurrence, but then we do know of others, like myself and Laura, you know, yeah, who do fall into that category. So, yeah, no, but thank you, Emily. Yeah, that just, it's a good insight into actually, and Helen as well, what you know, what you think, what you, from your perspective, how it is. Yes, so.
I think leading on from that, if I can ask you guys a question, you know, what were your, you know, how did your secondary diagnosis come about? You know, what were your signs, your symptoms, and how did that kind of play out for you?
Yeah, do you want to go first, Laura, on this one?
So I just had a second primary breast cancer diagnosis in the September 2004. The one prior to that was September 2001. So I was still kind of in the place where I was still on tamoxifen. I was getting checked quite regularly, but even though I was still within the system, there hadn't been any discussion with me about things to look out for that constituted secondaries. So the breathlessness that I'd experienced for at least 7 months before I was diagnosed with secondary breast cancer, I had absolutely no idea that that bore any relation to either one of my 2 primary breast cancers that I've had. So around about the May, I started experiencing the May of 2007. I knew I was, well, I actually think I was unfit, and I was approaching my 40th birthday. That was going to be the October of that year. And I kept thinking to myself, right, I must get fit, get myself to the gym, start doing a few more exercises. This breathlessness, crikey, you know, I'm getting to 40. I had absolutely no idea that it was linked in any way to the secondary. It wasn't until the December of 2007, and even then, I'd actually gone to my GP and had a referral for back pain, for lower back pain, which was troubling me. But even then, I still wouldn't have put the connections together. That lower back pain actually turned out to be just wear and tear on L4 and 5. So that was nothing to do with the presence of secondaries. It was the shock of finding out, actually, the MRI scan that you had in your spine has showed shadowing in the lungs.
Right.
Yeah. It was as blunt as that.
Wow.
And I actually thought it was to do with the odd cigarette I'd had when I was like a teenager, early 20s. And it was only then that it was explained, no, it's not that type of cancer that we can see in your lungs. It's spread from your original primary. So I naively said, how? You know, how does that happen? And how come I didn't know anything to look out for? Or so it was totally a shock.
Yeah, must have been a massive shock.
Yeah, but it's a very similar story to mine actually, because you know, I was 7 years without any sort of like without any problems really. I was on tamoxifen for 5 years, and I went back to do my job, to do my personal training and to teach classes and whatever. And for me, it was a bit different in the respect that I had no symptoms whatsoever. I actually felt really well, apart from being a bit tired. But because my oncologist, like yours, Laura, didn't discharge me, then I was going to him every 6 months and he was examining me. But the irony of it is, at no point did he actually discuss red flags with me. He just basically said, look, you know, you're coming every 6 months, but if you don't feel very well in any way, then just come back and see me. The door was always open for me. So anyway, he examined me on this particular occasion and he found a lump behind my collarbone. And obviously that was quite suspicious. And then I had a PET scan and we found lymph nodes in the mammary chain that were affected. And also I had a small lesion on my second rib. So, but I had no pain or anything. But but at least he didn't discharge me. At least I wasn't just like, ushered out of the door by the nurse and like, off you go, and don't worry about it anymore. I actually had him as a sort of almost like, a safety net. So that was my secondary diagnosis, and it's obviously after that it's like it's all history after that. But the red flag symptoms are very important, I think, and all primary breast cancer patients should be made aware of those. They should, even like in a little pack or something that you get given when you go away. We know that Joe Taylor, founder of MetUpUK, made up these infographics years ago, which are actually being used now within the NHS, as we know. So those symptoms, those red flags, are really important for people to know.
Yeah, they should be given to every patient, shouldn't they?
Exactly. And I will say that I've seen infographics with red flags and things, and there's nothing out there that compares with Joe's infographics that are actually quite detailed, but they're very comprehensive as well. So I'd say to anybody, please, if you haven't got hold of Joe's infographics, MetUp's infographics, then do so.
Yeah, I mean, that was how I first really heard about the symptoms of secondary breast cancer, I think, because my oncologist, when I finished my primary treatment, really said that if you have anything bothering you, you should come back, or any symptom that lasts more than 2 or 3 weeks. But she never specifically said, you should look out for breathlessness or back pain or bone pain. It was never kind of went through in that list, which is, yeah.
I think as well for me, the shock of finding out that what they were actually talking about was breast cancer that had spread to another part of my body and that was no longer deemed curable. That spiraled me into a mental decline, because it was a total trauma and a total shock. I absolutely didn't know what they were talking about. Plus, I received that news when I was on my own. That didn't help, but that's a slightly new story. But yeah, the impact of hearing what that actually meant was so shocking that my mental well-being literally was in tatters. And of course, it's a hugely traumatic experience to hear that you have secondary breast cancer. But I think hearing all of those words and terminology and what that meant for the very first time, and not even really understanding, I honestly thought before I was a secondary breast cancer lady that secondary breast cancer meant that someone had had breast cancer twice. I had no idea.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think there's lots of women out there who still wouldn't be necessarily aware, because there are still so many people not being told at the end of their active treatment to primary breast cancer. And ideally, in an ideal world, we need those infographics that Joe's produced to be given to every single patient.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot to be said, I think, about having regular checkups as well. The fact that every time my progressions have been caught early, I feel very fortunate in the fact that, I've been able to, we've almost like been able to, change treatments, but it's been done at a time where it's not too late. And that's everyone's fear as well, is that, you could get a progression and it's too late to do anything about it. But I think the fact that I've had follow-ups all the time and regularly, there's a lot to be said about that. I think the door should always be left open. Nobody should be discharged.
Yeah, I still feel that even though I'm part of MetUp and I use the infographics myself, and I have conversations with you ladies all the time, that I'm very naive about certain aspects, and kind of how cancer is portrayed in society is a little bit, you hear cancer and you think death, and primary and secondary are very, very different diseases. And I think that, people just don't have that awareness because it's not talked about. It's not talked about you know, when they talk about a celebrity and, you know, that they may be ill, and they don't kind of distinguish between, you know, what primary is, what secondary is, and what that means for that person. And, you know, and it all kind of just builds into a way of kind of creating fear, I suppose. And actually, it's something, if we talk about it more and people could understand what it is, you know, people would be more comfortable. You know, in, you know, primary patients going forward, they might not have that level of fear by making themselves aware and understanding it a little bit better. You know, that fear does go. I think it's more of a comfort to me to, you know, work with you guys. And you know, you're all fantastic ladies, and you all do so much, and you all, you know, whilst going through this, working jobs, and you all, you know, are all fighting and advocating for you know, secondary breast cancer patients. It's just, you know, quite admirable.
Definitely, I second that, Emily.
Yeah, we do what we can to help.
You do amazing.
I think it's important that knowing that there are going to be, you know, tomorrow, the next day, the day after that, there's going to be kind of, you know, so many women being diagnosed with secondary breast cancer all the time, who, had they just had a little bit more knowledge, they would feel more empowered to actually understand what's being said to them, to ask the right questions. And so raising awareness, raising awareness, it's hugely important, isn't it?
No,
Yeah.
definitely.
How do you balance your fear of recurrence with awareness?
Oh, that's it. I mean, it's very tricky because as we were just all saying, it's so important to be aware of the symptoms, but there's definitely a kind of, obviously, it's you know, as primary patients, we're all worried about developing secondary cancer. And I think there's a kind of a fine line between being aware and knowing your body and kind of tipping over into a bit of anxiety. And I think trying to find that balance is definitely a bit of a challenge, but I still think it's still better to know and to engage with it than to just stick your head in the sand. And actually, one thing that I found really useful actually was that a friend of mine, who also is a breast cancer patient, also suggested to me is that if you have, because when I first finished chemo, I was very like, no, I hadn't done any exercise for ages. I had loads of aches and pains. My hips felt like they were about to fall off. And I was very kind of worried, like, oh, is it the cancer? Is it my cancer is back? Has it spread? And kind of every little ache and pain was really, really kind of, I was very worried about it. And I think, and what she suggested was kind of quite a good strategy, because I think one of the real problems is it's kind of a loss of control. You don't know, you know that 30% of patients will go on to develop secondary breast cancer, but there's no real way of knowing who it's going to happen to, and so you're not really in control of it at all. And so I think my friend gave me a kind of mental trick to kind of help take control, which is essentially every time I felt some weird pain or lump or bump in my body that I was worried about, she said, write it down on a piece of paper and like set yourself a calendar reminder for like 3 weeks time, and if you feel that pain again within that time, just think, I don't need to worry about this because I'm dealing with it. I've got a reminder. I am dealing with it and I'm being proactive. And then when the reminder comes, obviously, then if you've had the pain still continuing for 3 weeks, then you should contact your your oncologist or your GP and get it checked out. But actually, I found doing that really helpful, because quite often I was just able to kind of felt like I was a bit more in control and like I was dealing with it. And then often the pains would disappear and then the alarm would go off and I'd be like, oh, actually, that seems to have gone, so I'm probably okay. But there were so that was quite, I found a helpful strategy. And there were quite a few occasions where I did have scans because I was, and that was also helpful, because you kind of feel like you're worried, but you're kind of doing something about it rather than just getting stuck inside your own head. Kind of being a bit proactive.
I completely agree with you, Helen. I do exactly the same strategy. I didn't know you did that strategy, but I do exactly the same. You know, I write it down, At the beginning, I actually would, anything, my back hurt, I would be ringing the GP, I'd be turning up, I would be shouting at the receptionist and saying, you need to see me, I've had breast cancer and I need to be checked. And at first I was going in and I was all wound up about it, and then they would see me and they kind of say, well, you know, come back in 2 or 3 weeks if it's still there. And then I felt like I was being dismissed, which then just played into that anxiety. And actually, when I started to do this and you know, note down the date that I first had a symptom, and then, you know, like you say, set an alarm for 3 weeks' time. In that time, I was able to get on with my life. I was able to focus on other things. And I didn't allow that anxiety to take over. So it allowed me to kind of gain some sense of normality after treatment. But I think, you know, also through educating myself through kind of, you know, MetUp's information, infographics, also kind of alleviate that anxiety and gave me that reassurance that, you know, I didn't need to worry, and that, like you say, it's like that you're taking control of the anxiety in that way, aren't you? Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah,
and it's having the opportunity to be encouraged to have an open dialogue with your GP, for example, who he or she must know and be aware that you're a primary breast cancer lady, and that there are key things that together you're going to look out for and be vigilant about.
Yeah.
But not as a one-sided approach. It's got to be a shared responsibility, isn't it?
I feel when I've done that, if I have had to go back to the GP and say, well, you know, I've had back pain, I've had it for, you know, 3 or 4 weeks now, and I've noted the date I first got it, and, you know, I find that they're much more engaged with you, and they say, right, okay, yes, because you've recorded that, yes, we'll send you back to your oncologist, you know, they'll organise a scan, and you know, you get your follow-up appointments, and, you know, and every, you know, I've probably had 3 or 4 scans since my diagnosis, and each one has been clear. But I think it's reassuring to know that that is open to me. The door is not closed in that way. If and that you can go in and if you kind of, you know, managing it in that way, that you can advocate for yourself with the medical professionals. I think they listen to you.
Well, I think from a secondary breast cancer person's point of view, that word advocate is something that, if it wasn't for people like Mary, who I've followed for a long time now and we've become friends, that word advocate is something that I attach to Mary Huckle, because that message, it's so important. We are being our own advocates, aren't we? But people like Mary, you're encouraging everybody to understand that that is so important.
Yeah, I just feel like, you know, I feel like I've been doing it for a long time. and luckily, you know, more and more people are sort of like jumping on that bandwagon. You know, we do see a lot of influencers now talking about self-advocacy and, you know, banging on your GP's door and getting seen when you think that there's something not quite right. So yeah, I almost feel like, you know, if I keep saying it, it's like, oh, well, they said it already, but I've been saying it for years. So when I'll hand it. But yeah, no, definitely. I think the other thing to consider as well is that we go, you know, when you're diagnosed with primary breast cancer, we are very ignorant of the real facts. And so we go through life literally ignorant. And there are lots of misconceptions out there. I think we've discussed this before, that, for example, a stage 1 cancer cannot reoccur. Well, actually it can. You know, I was stage 1. I had no lymph node involvement at all. I had all my lymph nodes removed as, like, you know, belts and braces approach. But my breast cancer came back after 7 years. And there's this thing about around a 5-year mark as well. You know, what's all that about? Because we know that breast cancer, unfortunately, can reoccur years after a primary diagnosis. So, you know, you do have to be alert to a certain extent, but you mustn't become obsessed with it. But just knowing the facts, it is empowering, and it does make you feel more at ease. And I would rather feel like that and have the facts and be completely ignorant, and then suddenly be in a lot of pain and really be scared, terrified, in fact, you know, and then go to your GP and, you know, whatever. But there's a lot of education that needs to be done across the board, you know, patients and also our medical professionals. We hold them in such reverence that we don't always want to question or challenge them. And, you know, this is our life, our lives. And we have to have the confidence to challenge and question when we feel the need to do so.
Because it's quite an imbalance, isn't there? The message about checking our breasts, lumps, bumps, whatever, and all of the various variations on that. So people hear this message about checking their breasts, and that's, you know, how we find something often. Not always, sometimes obviously picked up to a mammogram and things like that. But then the message about checking ourselves for red flag symptoms of secondaries, that's not quite out there. But however, as part of our campaign this month, early on there's been this idea, you know, seconds on the second, let's start talking and get it out there about what these red flag symptoms are and what to look out for, so that people can be as aware as they were hearing the message, you know, let's check for lump, and that's primary breast cancer. The two have got to sit equally, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, what I do when the feeling on the first thing comes out, then I always do a post. It's like, feel your breasts, what, you know, collarbone, armpit, whatever, but also be aware of other pains or other things that aren't quite right in the rest of your body, because, you know, we know about de novo diagnoses as well. And, you know, for people that don't know that, when you're diagnosed de novo, it's when you're basically being diagnosed with stage 4 straight after your primary. So, you know, and that does happen, sadly, because people just aren't body aware. They're not aware of what's wrong or right in their bodies. So, yeah, there's a lot to be said about feel it on the first.
So following on from that, and kind of probably to start wrapping up, Laura and Mary, what is the one thing that you think would like a newly diagnosed secondary breast cancer patient to know?
One thing.
Put you on the spot there.
This is a tough one.
I mean, we've covered some of this already, perhaps.
Yeah, we have already, haven't we? I think from my perspective, definitely, I would say, you know what you're dealing with. You know, be body aware. I've got more than one thing here. You know, and don't be afraid to challenge. But you know, know your condition is like knowing your status, you know, understanding your grading, your staging, and be aware that the status can change, that breast cancer can actually change its spots. So it's things like that that we, you know, people just aren't made aware of, you know, and so that's
being afraid to ask. So if you are newly diagnosed as a secondary breast cancer person, then all of this language around it and the terminology that's used, it's like a totally new language to you. So it's very important that from the beginning you ask and ask and ask. And even if you're not in an environment where you feel as though you're being encouraged to ask, you've got to ask and ask again, and not be afraid to do so, and clarify, and get your care team who are looking after you, get them to explain, you know, this is the treatment that we're putting you on now, but this is how the system works. This is what the lines of treatment are. This is, if this doesn't work, we will explore other things, and this is what they are. So that you're not floundering around in the dark, not knowing what's coming next, what's happening next, what can I be offered next.
Yeah, like knowledge is power, isn't it?
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point, actually, Laura. You know, the treatment lines, I understood nothing about treatment lines when I was first diagnosed. I was just like, I don't know, just didn't understand it at all. You know, clinical trials as well, for me, was just a complete, you know, I just thought that if you know, to go onto a clinical trial, you literally had to run out of all your options. But now, you know, I understand now that actually you can ask to be on clinical trials, even as a primary breast cancer patient. And, you know, and you can talk about clinical trials very early on rather than later on. You know, not the journey, but, you know, rather than later on when you're going through your treatment lines. So
it goes back to what you're saying about self-advocating, really, isn't it? Like, you know, you have to be your own advocate.
Absolutely.
And so finally, one last question. what would you want primary patients to know, and how can they help as well? What can primary patients do to help secondary patients?
Absolutely. Please, follow us, follow MetUpUK. We are the only patient advocacy group in the UK. And, we're trying to make things better for secondary breast cancer patients. But more importantly, the way that I see it is that I may not, be here long enough to actually benefit from some of the stuff that we're doing. The way that I see it is that I really, really want to, help primary breast cancer patients and, and make them aware of what, how they can make their lives better and how they can, just, oh gosh, it's like, you can get really emotional about this, but I don't want to get emotional. We're doing this for our future, for our children, and for you guys, for Emily and Helen, and I'm myself and Laura are so grateful to have you as part of MetUpUK, because I think you can really sort of like set the tone, and we can really make inroads into improving, lives of breast cancer patients, both primary and secondary.
Yeah, I agree, and I think for me, there's a little bit of, this a selfish thing to get out of it. Although I come and I support you guys, and I learn a lot from you. I learn about self-advocacy. I learn about the signs and symptoms and the red flags to look out for. But I kind of see that if at some point in time I need to have treatment for, a recurrence or a secondary diagnosis, with the sayings that you were saying, is it 1 in 3, Helen, or the
roughly, yeah, about 30%.
Yeah, that go on to get a secondary diagnosis. If we're fighting now to get access to drugs and trials, that the fight is always going to go on, and by doing the advocacy work and the campaigning, if I was to get a diagnosis, I'm going to get access to treatments that previously weren't available. So it is important to me to be making sure that I'm part of that group who are campaigning and laying that groundwork for the future of other patients as well.
Well, yeah, like Mary said, MetUpUK is paving the way for all of those yet to be diagnosed, which we know is going to be happening tomorrow, the next day, and suddenly you are in that second category. And I know it's a phrase that's overused, we're all in this together, but as primary and secondary breast cancer people, we are.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The disease doesn't choose specifically who's going to get it. It can be anyone.
We're trying to close that huge chasm between primary and secondary breast cancer. There's a grey area in between the two, and I think Joe's been advocating for years, for years and years, and we need support, and we need the people to sort of like come and support us, so that we can actually instigate these really important changes. The geographical inequalities as well across the country. That is so important. I remember, speaking in Parliament about that back in 2014, and it's still ongoing. We need to just like get back in there and just like, just work together with other charities as well, and just do what we can.
And one thing, I'm amazed at the advocates who are working for MetUpUK, because the vast majority of the patient advocates have secondary breast cancer. So these are women who are often working and going through treatment, maybe having weekly treatments that are giving them all kinds of side effects, and yet still finding the time to push for drugs and awareness and more research and all these aims. And so it's just, we should help you guys out as much as we can.
Absolutely. And we're all volunteers as well.
Yes, exactly. Giving your time and giving precious time as well to the cause. It's really,
yes. Oh gosh, have we exhausted everything now?
I think, shall we, let's leave it there, shall we? But lovely to chat to you all, and
thank you, girls.
Thank you.
Thank you for telling us,
ladies,
about secondary breast cancer and your experiences.
And thank you to you two as well, and to Laura as well. And yeah, I thank
Thanks,
myself.
guys.
You thank each other.
All right.
The Mutual Appreciation Society. Oh, thank you,
Bye.
girls. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.